got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to another weekly episode of Dynasty Theory. I'm John Bauer on X at the Bauer Club. We have Dan Lamagna at FF Coach Dan. What's up, Dan?
JB, good to see you, man. Coming off it's been a wild Sunday into Monday. You know, my Phillies winning exciting fashion in the ninth inning. My Cowboys edge your Steelers. I don't know if you made it up as late as I did, JB, but it was worth the sleep deprivation. But then my freshman team that I coached, kind of, I don't know, 6-6, JB. I mean, I got to get a little more red zone offense going, but it's been a fun 24 hours of sports.
No, I fell asleep. I want to say it was about 2 minutes into the game, and that's not an exaggeration. I was out of town this weekend, and I wasn't making it up.
I think Mitch told me a little bit about your weekend out of town there. I think you partied up a little bit there.
Yeah, and he as he typically does, he held down the fort on the weekly start sit show, but we'll be back with vengeance. We'll be back with vengeance next week. Tonight we want to spend some time talking about the running back position. We've spent a lot of time recently talking about every other position, but I feel like running back has been a little bit neglected here on Dynasty Theory. So kind of discussing some 1-2 punches that we've seen early in the season, but where one of the backs is a fairly highly sought after dynasty asset. You know, Dan, there's a ton of backfields we could spend time talking about. You know, during the offseason, we've talked about Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. We've talked about Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. The list goes on, but there are very few backs that were getting the off-season startup draft capital or the trade market value, like backs such as Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs. So I want to spend some time here. What are your thoughts overall? Because I know during the offseason, Mitch was a big proponent of getting 1 or 2 backs somewhat early in the draft, depending on where he was from a draft position standpoint. The running back position in general, if we always talk about KTC and fantasy calc just for quick market values, but if you go on KTC and you give it a little bit of a tight end premium boost, the first running back in their rankings is 15th overall. Fantasy calc is 16th overall. Does that surprise you with what we've seen so far?
Oh, man. You know, I think what we've seen is, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily surprised from what we talked about in the offseason to now. There are some guys I'd obviously like to see a little bit higher and some guys I'd like to see a little lower. Like some of these old heads, JB, are up at the top of the scoring ranks at this point in the year. And when we look at running backfield situations tonight, like, you know, most of my rosters, I think, especially now that the bye weeks are popping up, is kind of let me know where my depth is, like how I'm kind of stationed at each position. And I always want to stay strong at running back, but I also want to be very careful too of how we construct our rosters and not overpaying for them. And, finding these handcuffs or these 2 running back situations that we're looking at and seeing, hey, where do these other running backs fit in our depth as we manage our roster at this point in the season and then moving forward. So, I think when we look at those fantasy calculator rankings, I think we got to really break it down and put some things in perspective, how this fits our dynasty roster construction moving forward and into the future.
And I think it's interesting because we talk about these guys and you talk about roster construction and how it fits your team. If you're not contending, or if you're in the middle of the pack and you want to position yourself for kind of maybe a younger build looking ahead to next year, there probably still is a market for these guys. And these guys specifically being Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall, with their lack of production, but you have the name value, you have the pedigree, you have the historical production and hype associated with both of them. And, so you can pivot off of them if you're looking to go towards a rebuild. But if you're contending, I still think there is a little bit of a market that you could jockey yourself here into a better position. And we'll talk about some of the trades, but I think for the most part, the fact that they are both, and Jahmyr Gibbs too, but he has been producing, but the backs that were at the top of the draft boards, the top of the dynasty value during the offseason, they're still there despite the, I don't want to say lack of production, but lack of ceiling that we've seen. When you invest in these players, Dan, it's like, okay, I'm investing in them because they're young, but I think they truly give me a positional advantage. And you spoke about the old heads. Look at the guys that have just been productive. Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, not necessarily old, but discounted. Kyron Williams, and those names that I mentioned, a little bit on the higher end from a offensive production standpoint from their team in general, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the frustrating. The young guys that we were banking on, we're hoping to have that edge. They're not hurting us. They're 10 to 15 in the rankings, but if you told me Alvin Kamara was going to be second and Chuba Hubbard was going to be seventh in scoring, and the James Conner and Aaron Jones are going to outscore these young dudes, I'm a little depressed right now, man, because I'm not getting my edge on you like I thought I would, JB. You're managing a roster where, hey, I'd rather build it around a young receiver than I would a running back. So if you could kind of eliminate my edge by getting by with those backs, and then maybe you got some younger backs on your bench for the future or some draft picks where you'll get younger later, you're in good shape.
Yeah, we've talked about this previously with the lack of the edge that the high-end quarterbacks might be giving you. And I say that, but this past week we saw a thriller between Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow, most notably, and the tight end position too. I have found that for me personally, like the teams that are doing well on paper right now, that look good in the standings, maybe not necessarily overall from a dynasty value perspective, but from a starter rank over there on Dynasty Daddy, or whatever view you want to look at for a win now situation. It's the older backs. It's the still anchor quarterbacks, but you can get away with some of these guys like a Geno Smith, certainly a Kirk Cousins this past week, but it's not coming into play with these young stud running backs, the young stud tight ends. That's not where you're getting the advantage. So let's dig in a little bit here. And I spent some time this evening, Dan, digging up some numbers and metrics, and I want to throw those out before I get your thoughts on Bijan Robinson and Tyler Allgeier. Bijan so far, so over the last 2 weeks, narrowing it down, running backs with at least 15 carries. So the filter isn't too far, but it eliminates those guys that just had a few touches. He's actually tied for 5th in missed tackles force per attempt, right? So 0.32. He was at 0.19 through the first 3 weeks, but the first 2 games of the season was actually his most productive from a fantasy standpoint, but he was the 18% target share those 2 weeks. Last 3 weeks, he's just above 7%. You can point to a few things, maybe Tyler Allgeier being a little bit more involved, but I really think it comes to the emergence of Darnell Mooney over the last 3 games. He's had 20 targets combined over the last 3 games, and just the consolidated target share between Drake London and Darnell Mooney. You look at the rush ratio between Bijan and Allgeier, it's 2-1. So Bijan's still getting 67% of the rushing market share split between those two. But also we talked about, the guys that are performing well are, for the most part, on teams that are producing. Bijan's only had 3 carries inside the 10. For context, Dan, Kyron has 15 carries inside the 10. So you can kind of remove any inefficiencies as long as you're getting those high value touches inside the red zone and inside the 10, inside the 5, but also in the receiving game. And that's something that Bijan Robinson just really hasn't seen so far this year.
Yeah. And I wouldn't let it panic me. I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, like, hey, these are guys that if we wanted them in the offseason, early part of the season, we couldn't even sniff them. Like people were asking for like first upon first. Now what you hope, kind of like a stock market, like is there a little bit of a window to obtain them? He came out of the gate solid, as you mentioned, in those first few weeks. And then if you remember, he was nursing a little bit of an injury because so now the coach he's kicking in. He was nursing an injury going into the New Orleans game week 4. And I'm sure Atlanta's smart and saying, hey, he's nursing this injury and we got a quick turnaround in week 5 being a Thursday game. How much, do we want to pound Bijan or make sure there's some gas left in the tank for a Thursday game? Because they got to get these running backs through the whole season. So I think you have that little, preservation factor there with Bijan. They've got a good running back in Allgeier, so they could bounce it off. Hey, we need to take a little bit of load off of them. We could do that with 2 backs in this kind of matchup. And Kirk Cousins has been hot. You mentioned, Mooney emerging. So I think from a dynasty perspective, I think you got to look at the whole picture. And if there is a window to get him, I'm going to be really aggressive now because that window could close at any time when he has a huge week. At the end of the day, he's still one of the youngest running backs in the league. That's a stud and is, the team's building around him and we know we're going to have him for a long time. So to me, that's more important than, hey, maybe I could trade some of these guys as tools that are ranking pretty high that I know aren't going to have the lengthy career that a Bijan's going to have. If I'm going to build around running back, he's got to be young.
Yeah, and we talk about the way the position, it tends to get flipped upside down more quickly, more than any other position, because it comes down to the shelf life. But like just going through the names here, you look at the fantasy calc rankings, Bijan Robinson not necessarily producing at the level we want. Breece Hall not producing at all the last 2 weeks. And, I keep skipping over Jahmyr Gibbs on purpose because we are going to get to him and Breece Hall eventually here during tonight's discussion. But then it's like Saquon Barkley, 27-year-old back. Jonathan Taylor, people were kind of worried about, well, what's it going to look like? And he popped off a nice game 2 weeks ago. He was out this week. Etienne, he's concussion. Kenneth Walker's been productive, but we always talk about like the guys that could really inject life within a position. We talked about it with tight ends during the whole offseason with Kincaid, Laporta, Brock Bowers. I talking to you, Dan. I can't believe Brock Bowers slipped my mind there. But like, it's such a unique situation because we were hoping and expecting these guys to come out the gate and produce. Breece Hall, he's getting Aaron Rodgers. That offense should be far more efficient. And we saw what Breece Hall did last year coming back from injury. It didn't matter. Bijan Robinson, he gets Kirk Cousins. And we're hoping this offense really opens up and it's going to benefit him from an efficiency and a high value touch perspective. And like I said, we just haven't really seen it yet. But I'm with you, Dan. I'm not saying we need to be really worrying about Bijan Robinson. Like I said, one thing that you can really point to is the missed tackles forced per attempt, and being tied 5th over the last 2 weeks. Like that shows that he's still being efficient and making the most of opportunities that maybe weren't necessarily there for him. So I still think Bijan, he is in my top tier still for running backs. The only thing I will say, the running back position overall, like I said, KTC, the first running back off the board right now is 15th overall. Fantasy Calc is 16th overall. In 12-team Superflex tight end premium formats, I would have a really hard time taking any of the running backs in the first 18 picks or so. And then you're already a little skeptical. And listen, I know as listeners, people are probably thinking, hey, there's a little bit of panic a few weeks ago over Caleb Williams, over Garrett Wilson, over Kyle Pitts. We just need to be patient. These guys are going to bounce back. And you know how it is, Dan. Like there's so many times you talk about a player, whether it's on Dynasty Theory or just in the DD fantasy football community on Discord, and they pop off for a game after you had some negative comments. But it's always very cyclical. People they have their spike weeks, they have their lulls. So, we spoke about Garrett Wilson last week, right? You were still on the Garrett Wilson wagon. He went out and had a nice target share. Guess what? I wasn't able to move any of my Garrett Wilson shares at the market cost that they should have been going for. So I still have them. So when we talk about players, even if we are maybe a little negative or that P word, a little panicked maybe, we're not dumping these guys just to dump them. We still need the return necessary. And a lot of that is based on market conditions. And that's where the market inefficiencies come into play. So like Garrett Wilson, for example, I was not able to move any of my shares because people didn't want to pay the price. So I still have, so I just want to get that disclaimer out there because a lot of the comments on the recent episodes, and I always appreciate the feedback and I love the level of activity from our listeners, but it's all about the market. And if it's not there, we're not advocating to just dump these guys. So I want to make that clear.
No, and that's the beauty about Dynasty Fantasy Football. We could trade weekly, and we're always trying to build a roster. Sometimes we're building it for a quick edge, but we're looking long term. So, hey, Garrett Wilson, you weren't looking to dump him, but you're saying, hey, maybe now's the time I could see what's out there. It didn't work out. Hey, we know stars, they're going to find a way to get those players the ball. He did, and JB, the market might be a little hotter right now.
All right, so let me ask you, let's get back to my little tangent there, because I've been thinking about that, and I don't want to be panic pushers over here. I don't want to be fear mongers, if you will, and I think that's very important to really throw that out to our listeners. But Bijan Robinson, running back 2 on KTC, running back 1 on Fantasy Calc, 12-team Superflex, start 10, 0.5 PPR, Bijan Robinson, or 2, let's call it 2 mid 2025 firsts.
12-team league, it's only half-point PPR. I want Bijan. I want that guaranteed sure thing. He's one of the top 3 backs that I have to have. Again, even though he's like 12th overall in scoring and we would love for him to be top 5, hey, teams, these games are going to get more important and the weather's only going to get colder and you're going to have to run the ball in November and December and you're going to want Bijan on your roster. So give me that locked, signed, sealed, and delivered RB1 for many, many years. Bijan.
Now, can I ask, though, is there a situation, context is so important, and obviously it's very difficult to get context when we're just running through these trades that we pull from dynastydaddy.com. But is there a situation that based on your league and your roster, you're more likely to hold off and maybe allocate those resources elsewhere? Or are you leaning more towards, hey, I'm taking Bijan and I'll figure things out later elsewhere?
Are you talking from the person of what's the roster situation, JB?
Let's say middle of the pack. I have a couple running backs that I feel okay with. Let's say James Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Travis Etienne were my 3 core backs.
Yeah, I want to get a hold of that Bijan. When you look at McCaffrey, we have injury concerns. We're taking him as a win now. You can't pass him up in drafts. Travis Etienne's getting a little bit scary right now. James Cook's solid, but Buffalo's kind of like a roller coaster. I just want that steady running back that's in his early 20s that I'm going to get a long window out of him. And that's where I'm looking to say, hey, I'm going to either hold if I have him and I'm going to build around him, because that's the kind of, even if I was struggling, if I want to rebuild, I want to rebuild with Bijan. If I'm got an opportunity to buy him because there's a little window open now, I want to buy him. He's just the kind of running back I want to build my team around him. And there's only a few of them. There's just only a few of them possible. And there's probably some people out there, JB, that say, hey, I believe in the 0 running back. I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll figure out the running back position. I'd rather build my roster another way. I respect that. There's a couple ways to build a dynasty roster. We've talked about that. But for me personally, if I could get a Bijan, a Gibbs, a Breece Hall, I think Jonathan Taylor was kind of like my 4th in that mix this year. They're the guys I want to try to anchor around. Now, hey, if someone wants to overpay, truly overpay, we'll listen.
Don't forget to hit that like button if you're watching. Don't forget, and I'm sure you already are, but subscribe to the DD Fantasy Football YouTube channel. And what I've been doing, it's kind of been later in the shows, Dan, but if you're watching right now and you've gotten to this point in the video, what is your point on Bijan? As a listener, are you willing to move to, call it mid 25 first in 12 team superflex formats? And in this specific situation was 0.5 PPR, or does context really come into play more? Or are you one to say, hey, I'd even maybe add a second in there to get Bijan and get something done here? So drop your comment, drop your thought in the chat. I that's one of my favorite things about being able to put the videos out and not just the podcast, because you get the comments. I try to jump in and get it there, little spurts, answering what I can, but it's always great to get feedback. All right, Bijan Robinson or Caleb Williams, 12-team Superflex PPR.
Hey, if it was a startup, I'd be drafting Caleb. So if we're in season and we're trading and wheeling dealing, we're playing Superflex. Man, I'm in on Caleb. I'm just high on him, high on the talent. Yeah, give me that Caleb. I have a lot of Caleb Williams. So as much as I love you, Bijan, I'm gonna figure out my running back position. I want to be just super solid at quarterback. Not leaving that up for chance, JB.
Like I said, some of the comments, people were very upset with me a few weeks ago. Now might be the chance to redeem myself, fans of Caleb Williams. I will take Caleb Williams here in 12-team Superflex formats.
Here we go.
He's been a guy, he's moved down a tier, up a tier, down a tier. Like there's several players, like they've been teetering back and forth. I think there's still a lot of room for improvement.
Sure.
But Caleb Williams, we've seen a little bit of that as the early stages of his career. Yes, he's only 5 weeks into his rookie campaign, but in this situation, running back or Caleb, I will take Caleb. But still, for context, if you have not checked out my Dynasty tiers that are available within the DD Fantasy Football Discord, there are still 7 quarterbacks I'm taking over Caleb that are completely tiered above him. And then I have him tiered with Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts. I know a lot of people are going to be upset by that, but that's where I am right now. So not completely neglecting Caleb, but still having a few guys over him that I do prefer.
And that's okay. I won't hold that against you, JB. Like, again, I think you got to be a little risk adverse. It's kind of like the stock market. There's going to be some bumps for a rookie quarterback like Caleb Williams, especially when their O-line's weak and their play calling is sometimes suspect. But there's ups and downs with Bijan, as we're seeing right now, too, as a running back. So be patient, but he is a talented dude. So I'm glad you're coming around, JB. I'm glad you're coming around.
Listen, it wasn't. Coming around. I was vulnerable.
You were skeptical a couple episodes ago.
I was vulnerable. I wasn't thinking clearly, but tonight I'm staying hydrated. I have water. I have tea. I'm in the right state of mind. All right. Bijan in a 25 third or Nico Collins PPR 12-team Superflex.
This is getting harder because off season, maybe week 1, week 2 would be no brainer Bijan to me. We have seen Nico just be the dude, man. Like, he has been top 3. He is just awesome. But I would rather figure out my wide receiver situation than lose Bijan. Even though I love building around young receivers, and he's mid-20s, Nico? So he's still in that young wheelhouse there. It's a close trade. If you have to start 3 receivers, Nico could be very tempting. So I think it really depends on your roster construction. You could talk me the other way, but at face value, I'll go Bijan in the 3rd.
I'm going to go Nico here. I know we now have the hamstring injury, and the initial report was day-to-day, now week-to-week. He has shown he is just an absolute stud. And think about this week, like he went out early in the game. He still put up like 15 PPR points basically from one play. That's how explosive he can be. And while we are recording Monday night, the video usually drops Tuesday evening. But Dan, K. Adams initially Devontae Adams was going to be on the Up and Adams show on Tuesday morning. She just came back and said, lots happening at the moment. He won't be on tomorrow. So I'm wondering if there's a reason.
Something's brewing.
There was a quick change in direction there. So by the time everybody watches this, we'll have more clarity, hopefully, on what's going on.
Might be traveling. JB, let me ask you this, though. So Nico's been awesome, and I'm taking out week 5 in a hamstring pool. Nico was 15th overall through 4 weeks, all right, which is obviously a lot higher than Bijan was overall. But the real heavy volume running backs, Kamara, Barkley, Derrick Henry, Kyron, were still all higher than Nico, and they're a lot older than Nico. Like, do you want to lose that value of the position? That's where I wonder, I'm scared to go the Nico side because of that value of the position and Bijan's upside over a long period of time.
See, that, if anything, pushes me more towards Nico because you can find ways to supplement that running back room for far, far less. The way things have been playing out, like Nico, at this point, he is a week in and week out absolute stud. Like you're not getting the lulls. 6 for 117, 8 for 135 and a touchdown, 4 for 86. Like if his bust games are 4 for 86, like he needs to be right up there in the conversation with some of these top guys. So for me, I am, that pushes me more towards Nico than anything, because then, you have the little bit more insulated value because he is tied to CJ Stroud, but then you're not forced into situations where it's like Deebo Samuel, Michael Pittman on, who's going to play week in and week out, Xavier Worthy, Deontay John, like those types of wide receiver rooms. So give me Nico either way there.
Yeah, I mean, it's league-winning production without a doubt. I guess my running back room would just have to be youthful enough. Brian Robinson, James Cook, maybe got a take Bigsby and some depth with a J.K. Dobbins. Like, if there's just enough meat in that locker room, JB, I think you could sway me on Nico.
Okay. And then, we'll get to one of the follow-up questions here with Tyler Allgeier when we run through these other guys. I was worried that we weren't going to hit an hour tonight. Who was I kidding? All right. So moving on to Breece Hall and Braelon Allen. And I posed this in the Discord today. I said, tying into our conversation later tonight on this week's episode of Dynasty Theory, who are you more concerned with today as we go through, we're through week 5. So Dan, I'm going to put you to the test. Are you more concerned with Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall right now for dynasty purposes? And if you say neither, then my follow-up question is, if both of them are the same cost, which one do you go to acquire?
I'm more concerned with Breece Hall for a couple of reasons. Nothing to do with either running back's individual talent or anything like that, but it's a combination of the dysfunction in New York. There's a team trying to find their identity, trying to find their way, and they're losing, where Atlanta's winning. They've got a good feeling in that locker room, and everybody knows Bijan's the clear back. As good as Allgeier is, he might be a little pesky to us Bijan owners from time to time, but there's no doubt that it's all Bijan, and he is the guy. When you go to New York, there's a lot of Braelon Allen buzz. How do we use him more? How do we get it? It really feels like a 1-2 split almost. Like it feels different. And I don't know how much statistically, I'm sure you've been in the spreadsheets, JB. I don't know how statistically close it is, but it feels close. So I'm worried about team struggles. I'm worrying, if the team's struggling, the running game's struggling. If they can't figure things out passing, they're putting 8 in the box, and that's not happening in Atlanta. You put 8 in the box, Kirk Cousins is going to pick you apart. Not that Aaron Rodgers can't do that, but for some reason, the Jets are sputtering. They're not as well coached.
Yeah, just like I did with Bijan Robinson, I was kind of looking at these other backs, Breece Hall being one of them, and what we saw maybe the first couple games in the season versus the, weeks 4 and 5. where Bijan Robinson is still forcing missed tackles at a very high rate. 33rd out of 36 running backs in that same category that I mentioned with Bijan Robinson. That's where Breece Hall is. 33rd out of 36 running backs with more than 15 carries over the last 2 weeks at 0.05 missed tackles per attempt. He was at 0.17 through the first 3 weeks, and we've gone down to 0.05. But again, I don't know if that really speaks to Breece, like you said. I think there's other issues there. So maybe Davante Adams, he's getting on that flight and he's going to join his old buddy in Green Bay. Green Bay. Oh my gosh. From Green Bay in New York. Brain fart there. But and where Tyler Allgeier hasn't necessarily been fantastic, not to say Braelon Allen has been fantastic, but he's providing a lot more from a missed tackle perspective. I think he's doing more with the little opportunity right now that Breece Hall and Braelon Allen have. And he is going to be a little bit peskier ultimately when you're comparing Tyler Allgeier with Bijan Robinson and then looking at it in the same breath with Braelon Allen and Breece Hall. So you and I are in lockstep there. If there was concern over one of the two premier backs that we saw as workhorses coming in, I think it's pointing more to Breece Hall than it is Bijan Robinson. So this is another question that I pose to everybody right now in the comments. If you're concerned about one of them, who's it going to be? Or are we both out of our minds and, hey, they're both going to be just fine and they're both absolute studs and they need to be valued as such? Let us know.
Yeah, I love hearing the listeners' feedback and comments. And, I'm curious too, how much for Bijan his health maybe hindered the volume that he hasn't completely gotten. And then with Breece, how much is it maybe Nathaniel Hackett holding him back? Like, I feel more confident in Atlanta that Zach Robinson will figure things out and Bijan will get healthier. Could the Jets figure things out? Or, hey, maybe it was matchup specific with Breece Hall. Yeah, the Denver, whose defense has been really underrated, and the Vikings defense has been stellar. They're 5-0. So, hey, maybe matchups there, and maybe there's more hope in New York. But for me right now, JB, I'm a little more worried about Breece.
All right, well, let's look at some of the recent trades that are pulling up on dynastydaddy.com. Breece Hall for Rashee Rice and a 27 first, 12-team Superflex, start 9.5 PPR.
Yeah, for me, this one's easy. It's a smash Breece Hall, and it's a combination of, we talked about Rashee Rice last episode, injured off-field stuff. I'm just out at the moment. And then a 27 first. Anybody who knows me knows I'm just not that patient to wait to 2027. So let me enjoy these prime years of Breece Hall.
Breece Hall for David Montgomery, a 26 first, a 25 second, and a 25 third. 12-team Superflex, start 9 PPR. A lot of start 9 situations in these trades tonight. But what about that one, Dan?
This one is hard, but oh man, like David Montgomery looks really good. He's 27 years of age. And I would say he definitely has a good 2-3 years left in him. So if you're going to give me Montgomery a 26 first, like I think Montgomery might, with that Detroit line, score close to Breece Hall over the next 2 years. And then you're going to give me a 26 first. Never mind, you're also getting a second and a third. I think I'm going to take Monty in the package, JB.
Okay. And it doesn't surprise me with, our previous conversations around Rashee Rice, especially last week's episode, and then just the difference in the picks between 26 and 27.
What's your take on that? Because one thing I say, like, it feels gross. Like everyone was high on Gibbs, and I was super high on Gibbs, and I still am. I love Gibbs. He's doing fine, but I think I really have to accept that David Montgomery is going to be a valuable part of this offense. He's getting goal line carry. So does Gibbs. But I mean, the volume's there. That O-line's incredible. There's no signs that's going to slow down. The only thing I wouldn't know is, is Monty, when's his contract up? That might be a little bit of a question. I'd hate to see him leave Detroit. Then I might regret this trade. As long as he's going to be in Detroit at least next year.
Through 25.
So, hey, we got him 2 years, and then you have a 26 first coming your way. I like that.
Yeah, this one is a little bit more palatable for me. the 25 first. I'm not thinking about it nearly as much. I would go Montgomery in the 25 first and second, but 26 first with it being start 9. I think we can leverage that pick in another way. Again, it sounds super gross on paper, and if you were coming into the season and you had Breece Hall and somebody offered you this, you would scoff at it. You would scoff at this offer. But again, is it a realistic possibility that Montgomery outscores Breece, like you mentioned, over the next 2 years? Absolutely.
I think our sample size of David Montgomery in Detroit, it's large enough. All of last year, 5 weeks of this year, the data kind of tells me there's no reason that Monty can't keep up with him for a year and a half.
My only thing here is the touchdown upside is tremendous. Every game this season, David Montgomery scored. I think the streak goes back to last season as well. If I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back and look. But if those touchdowns start to slow down, and we know the extreme ceiling that Breece Hall presents whenever he is healthy, whenever he is given the opportunity, and there's, the offensive line is at least competent. Oh man.
There's no signs of Detroit slowing down.
I know.
That offense is great. O-line's going to be great for another year. The receivers are great. The quarterback's above average. The defense is getting better. Where the Jets, you got to worry. There's no signs that it's going to get better in New York. Rodgers isn't getting any younger.
I know.
That's a good try. I might have to look at something like that. I don't know.
I just, here's my thing. The first 2 weeks of the season, Breece Hall, he still has that receiving upside, and the Vikings, the Broncos, it kind of went away these last 2 weeks. Oh my gosh.
To your point,
I pull these trades so I don't have to answer them, Dan.
But to your point, if you could get a 25 first instead of a 26 with a Montgomery, then it's even more attractive because now you're not even waiting.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's value being left on the table here. That's, oh my gosh, I'm dilly-dallying here.
5.
Yeah,
4.
I'm okay with the package here, even though it's start 9. Okay, all right. Next one here: Breece Hall for Kenneth Walker and Rhamondre Stevenson, 12-team Superflex start 9, 0.5 PPR.
There's another one that feels gross, but I really like Kenneth Walker. He's that right after the top 3-4 guys we talked about. Kenneth Walker's up there. I know he missed 2 games, but boy, when he hasn't missed, 33, 26, 40 points. And Stevenson just got himself a nice contract. I know he's had a little bit of fumbling issues. That's concerning, but coach sent him a little message this last week, and I don't know if he really responded. 12.85 points, and I think he fumbled again too. So I don't know. I'll probably lean Breece. I probably go with Breece, but that's tough. I'm a little worried about Rhamondre. How could you fumble?
Rhamondre didn't fumble this week.
I'm not saying, am I reading that wrong? Let me go already.
Against Miami?
Oh, I think I had my settings stuck on 4 weeks. My bad.
89 yards, a touchdown, 4 receptions, no fumbles. That's
okay. I panicked. Because I was still in 4 weeks in the settings because I was going back a little bit. So yeah, he responded very well to the not being a starter, which is encouraging, so he played better. So, you're getting 2 running backs for 1, which is very valuable. And Kenneth Walker is very close to Breece Hall. So hopefully New England will get better and Rhamondre will be consistent. So
does the oblique concern you though with Kenneth Walker? That's popped up 2 years in a row now.
Yeah, he's been getting a little bit dinged up. He's another guy that runs aggressively. We've heard Mitch's concerns about Pacheco. Okay, Kenneth Walker's a little bit of a ferocious runner himself. Yeah, he was slowed up a little bit last week, but he had 7 catches. Of course, this is half PPR. But you like Breece for the catches too. So I'm not going to let it scare me away, JB. At 23 years of age, if this oblique issue has happened at around like 25, 26, I'd talk about it a little bit more. But at 23, I'd remain bullish with Kenneth Walker.
Okay. So the proof is in the pudding, if you will, in terms of Dan being a little bit more concerned with Breece Hall than Bijan Robinson. And I think that's reflected in his responses there with the last 2 trades that we discussed. I threw Gibbs and Montgomery in here. Now, this one is just sunshine and roses, but here's the thing. Like, Jahmyr Gibbs, I think we're kind of having this same conversation that we are having with Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall. If he doesn't find the end zone twice this last week against Seattle, he has 0 receptions over the last 2 weeks. And you think about Jahmyr Gibbs, that's pretty surprising. But he's catapulted himself up on KTC to running back 1, and he's running back 2 on Fantasy Calc. So people don't care how you're getting your points as long as you're getting your points, and he's doing just that.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the Detroit offense. Like, just it's so efficient. It's just a little bit of luck, I think, kind of creeps in there. Who's on the field in certain situations. Detroit is telling you that, hey, we're not going to have any tendencies. We will throw it to either of these guys. We will run short yardage with these guys. We will run goal line with either of these guys. Whoever's fresh and just gives us the best chance, they're going to find production. So even though Gibbs didn't have catches the last 2 weeks, I mean, he had 4 and 7 the first 2 weeks, and he just made it up with, end zone touchdowns, or he just finds a way to get the point. So,
and Gibbs, he's been super efficient, like we would hope and expect from a player like Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, and just looks explosive. Like he passes the eye test. And when you look explosive, you're putting up great stats, and you're only 22 years of age at running back. You're on a great team. I am super high on Gibbs, just like I am Bijan. I mean, those 2 are the dudes. Can't get enough.
And I didn't want to spend too much time on these guys. We talk about red zone and inside the 10 work. Gibbs and Montgomery, they have 7 and 10 carries inside the 10 respectively. So they both get work where it matters. It seems like the Lions do a very nice job of getting both of them involved, and they both have an opportunity to get theirs. So when we talk about the first 2 situations and we talk about this one, very different from what we're seeing from a public perception perspective. Say that 5 times fast. And, what the offseason expectations were. So I don't want to spend too much time, but I do want to spend a decent amount of time on this last one, Dan. And I think this is the hottest discussion right now from a running back perspective in tandem, but it's Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. I want your overall thoughts before I dive into things on what I kind of was digging up earlier today. But Etienne, Bigsby, Dynasty perspective, how are you feeling about these 2 guys? What are your thoughts?
Oh, man, I am very high on Tank, and I was of the preseason hype that we were trying to figure out on Dynasty Theory of like what's real and what's not. Tank was one of the guys I was buying in the offseason as far as being real. I thought he just settled into the system. Having coach running backs, like he passed the eye test in the preseason. He just looked so big and so fast and explosive for his size. So I was like, okay, I'm up, because Tank Bigsby was super cheap, right? And in the offseason, you were able to obtain him very easily. I wish I was even more aggressive. But now here in the regular season, like Tank is legit, and he is just pounding the rock and looking more explosive than Etienne. And you're kind of getting that. You're getting the feels, JB. You're getting the feels for Tank Bigsby like you are for where you're not getting it for Breece Hall, maybe. Now, I'm not out on Etienne. I mean, he has still had some decent running games. I think the problem with Jacksonville versus Detroit, where you're not getting as much production out of both, like total production out of both backs, is that passing game is struggling. So this offense is stalling at certain points. In a game like last week, Bigsby had the big plays, but Etienne still had 6 catches for 43 yards. You just would have loved for him to find the end zone or did a little more on the ground game. But the weeks before, for the amount of carries he had, he was hitting in the ground game. this is a team that's just not scoring enough points in the red zone. So I'm not out on Etienne, but man, it's going to be interesting to see what this Jaguar team does. I think that, again, I don't know what if it was there any truth to it, but they said, is Etienne a trade candidate? I don't know. Do they go in with Bigsby and try to dump his salary? I think he'd catch on really well somewhere else with Etienne. So I like Etienne. I'm not panicking, JB, but I do believe Tank's for real. And I think fantasy owners need to treat him that way. You got a 1A and a 1B here.
Yeah, this is the one situation when, obviously Jahmyr, Gibbs, and David Montgomery, because they both have been fantastic, they cap each other's ceilings, but they still can coexist and be productive. Breece Hall and Braelon Allen, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Allgeier. I don't know that it's necessarily as a result of Tyler Allgeier and Braelon Allen. I mentioned earlier, I think Braelon Allen impacts Breece Hall's ceiling a little bit more than Tyler Allgeier does to Bijan. But Tank is the one, when you look at a running back duo, this is the one where he is limiting Etienne's upside. But like Etienne, he has the shoulder injury. Like, how much is that lingering? Because, was it the Texans game? He was the third running back, I think, with a touch. Don't quote me on that. I'm trying to remember off memory. But Dearness Johnson was getting work early in the first quarter in that game. So it's like, yeah, he's been playing, but has he really been healthy? And it's not like Travis Etienne was extremely efficient last year. He had the touchdown upside with 11, but he was sub 4 yards per carry. And he's actually improved on that despite this poor game against the Colts in the running game. So while he isn't getting the work on the ground and the efficiency that we necessarily want, he's still involved in the passing game. And I think this is more of an injury that's lingering, and he's not able to be close to 100%. Now, maybe is a little bit of that just hopium on my part, because I do like Travis Etienne, maybe. But, and this really disappoints me with Tank Bigsby, because I really liked him coming out. And it's been a complete 180 with what we've seen. He has grown into this role. He has grown into being able to compete at this level, just completely different from what we saw last year. Dan?
I'm with you. I love them out of Auburn as well, but I needed a timeout there. I just need to know, did you say hopium? Did that word come out of your mouth? Is that a real word, or did we create that tonight?
No, it's a thing. I don't know. It's like a lingo thing.
Some hopium.
I'm hip. I'm with it. Or copium, if you want. You're coping,
For our Scrabble players out there, for our Scrabble listeners, let us know.
I don't know if they're
hopium
official,
or copium a word?
I don't think they're official words. If you go in the Webster Dictionary, I don't think you're going to find it there. Maybe you will. I don't know. But anyway, I'm distracted now. But
you do have to watch those injuries, though, because hey, Bigsby was hurt earlier in the year, missed a couple weeks of quality points. When he's been healthy, he's crushing it. When Etienne's healthy, he is explosive as well. So I think the concern here is in that Jacksonville team. Like they've got to figure some things out, because they're kind of dysfunctional, like the Jets.
Yeah, and hopefully Trevor Lawrence can turn the page here, and he kind of builds off of that game that we saw against the Colts. But like Travis Etienne tied 15th out of 36.18 missed tackles forced per attempt. He was at 0.22 last year. So it's not like he is really just completely regressed here. 3.7% explosive run rate last year. That's carries that go for at least 15 yards. He's at 3.8 this year. So again, pretty similar. Slightly down in route participation, 50 to 44%. But again, you like inside the 10 carries, he has 6. And we talk about a guy like Kyron with 15. And then you go over to Tank. He's 5th in the NFL over the last 2 weeks with 191 rushing yards. He's number 1 over the last 2 weeks. When you look at running backs with at least 20 carries, his explosive run rate is 20%. That is absurd. He has 75% of the team's carries inside the 5. He's number 4 in missed tackles per attempt, 17.5 PPR points per game over the last 2 weeks. And Etienne was running back 38 during that time in PPR formats. But like, here's my thing that I don't want to say it's a concern with Tank Bigsby because he was dirt cheap when people were acquiring him, such as yourself during this offseason. 9% route participation, not target share, route participation. That is super low. So as bleak as it's been for Travis Etienne, the silver lining for him is, despite the inefficiencies that we've seen from a rushing perspective, and that could be improved, and the involvement of Tank Bigsby and how explosive he's been, he still isn't tapping into Etienne's receiving work, which again is a nice positive sign and still a glimmer of hope for Travis Etienne moving forward.
I think the bottom line is it just depresses me about my Trevor Lawrence shares, because there's enough talent here at running back and production where, you know, Trevor Lawrence could only score 16 points versus the Browns, where everyone else in the NFL is slicing them up. Something's got to get better in that passing game.
Well, it's not something is going to be Brian Thomas. We've seen it already. He's going to just.
If it wasn't for him, geez.
Hey, Christian Kirk has been respectable.
We're getting there. I mean, the Colts defense makes everybody look good. So I mean, I'm a little more concerned with that week 1 through 4 Trevor Lawrence production than week 5.
That week 1 through 4 Trevor Lawrence production, that entire 23 Trevor Lawrence production. So the sample size is there.
We're traveling to the Bears here in week 6, so this might get a little scary.
Yeah, well, then their defense has been okay. But now, so we talk about Braelon Allen. Look at what he's done so far. He has an elite running back ahead of him. Braelon Allen on KTC is running back 20. Fantasy Calc running back 25. We have seen Tank Bigsby just crush it the last 2 weeks. KTC running back 32. Fantasy Calc running back 41. So that price discrepancy for me doesn't necessarily make sense. And I don't know how much of it is just Braelon Allen. He's a rookie. The expectation is that he will improve, much like we saw with Tank Bigsby. Even Tank Bigsby was horrendous in 2023 as a rookie. So I think if you do believe that Travis Etienne is going to continue to give up work and opportunities to Tank Bigsby, and Travis Etienne is going to continue to not be as efficient as we may like, Tank Bigsby is still a guy that you should be probably looking to buy at his current cost. You know, especially the opportunity should be there if a team that's not contending has Tank Bigsby. You know, a lot of people want to unload running backs. I think there could be something there possibly. So at least explore the opportunity. Don't get carried away. Don't go overboard, but just explore what's out there.
I love the comparison you gave versus Braelon Allen as far as value. I love them both. I'm super high on Braelon Allen, but I'm recognizing in Dynasty and leagues where I don't have them that those other owners are very high on Braelon Allen as well, and they're not moving them. So if you could go get Bigsby, who I still think is, I don't know, maybe a little bit less after this past week, but a little more obtainable than Braelon Allen, you could get him at a value.
And I know Braelon Allen, like he's been a little bit more involved in the pass game. Like I said, 9% route participation for Tank, but like who is more likely, forget about injuries, but who's more likely to supplant the starter between Braelon Allen and Tank Bigsby? I think most people would say Tank Bigsby. But again, like I'm still a little bit higher than market now with the market dipping on Travis Etienne. Like I do think a lot of this is a result of health issues, but does this continue to linger? We'll see.
Hey, we'll also see Foster Moreau just caught a touchdown from Derek Carr. Not to segue, but I'm actually starting Moreau in a league, so that makes me happy.
There is one league I have to look at. I think I was up 9 points and they had Foster Moreau. Ooh. I don't know if it was tight end premium or not, but if it's not, he's at 7.7 right now. So
every dynasty owner going against Foster Moreau, and it's probably rare, but they're in shock right now.
Yeah, like what are we doing? Come on. I mean, bye weeks though. I know Mitch had a rough bye week with his Lions on bye.
Yes.
He has several teams that had 4 Lions as starters. So this was
Yes.
it was a rough
Survive the
week
week.
all around for me as well. So let's get through a few trades here involving Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne in a 25-second or DeVonta Smith, 12-team Superflex start 10, 0.5 PPR.
To me, the PPR is what makes or breaks this trade. At half point PPR, I'm still a believer in ETN, and you're going to give me that second. I just value that running back position. And it probably, again, roster construction will always come into. If you've got a weak receiver situation, you have to start 3. Even in half point PPR, DeVonta could have some value, but at face value, I'll take ETN in a second. If it was full point PPR, I'd be all over DeVonta.
Yeah, in 0.5 PPR, running back is still king. Unless you can get up to somehow, and I'm not saying it with Travis Etienne specifically, but if you can get up to those guys like Nico Collins, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then above, like those are the guys that are still truly making a difference. Travis Etienne for Keon Coleman and Dontayvion Wicks, 12-team Superflex start 10 PPR.
Previous trade was hard. This one's an easier one for me. Now, if you listen to last week's Dynasty Theory, I don't hate Keon Coleman like JB does, but
I don't hate him.
I couldn't get that. I couldn't resist that little jab, but I still I like Keon. JB does not. I like Keon, but I don't love him. And Wicks, I think, is more of just an athlete than a good receiver. So I like ETN here. I think you're a star player for 2 kind of fillers. I ain't feeling that.
I also would go ETN here. Last one, and these are all actual trades that have gone through. And again, if you do believe that Travis Etienne is being hampered a little bit by the injury and he goes back to form a little bit here, then you should be digging in and seeing if there's any opportunities. So this one, it's 12-team Superflex start 9 PPR, Travis Etienne for Bucky Irving and Devin Singletary.
Start 9, definitely. Like when I think of Bucky Irvin, I think of just the spirit of this episode. He's like Tank Bigsby or Braelon Allen light, and Singletary just never really feels good, even though he's had some production. He always finds a way to produce. But in start 9, I just rather the flashy Travis Etienne and that upside, that ceiling versus Bucky and Devin.
Okay, that's fair. All right, Dan, for the 263rd time, going through some running back 1-2 punches here, maybe some opportunities, seeing both sides of these, especially with Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Braelon Allen, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Allgeier, and then just the 1-2 punch full of studs with Jahmyr, Gibbs, and David Montgomery. But maybe, sparking some ideas. And again, what I always love is even if you disagree with us, did it spark an idea? And that's what we're trying to get to here every week on Dynasty Theory. So, Dan, for the 263rd time, final thoughts for our listeners. What do you got?
I'm going to close out. This is a very running back heavy show, but it's like therapy session for me. I thought he was maybe Cleveland would get something out of their offense this week versus Washington, thinking that game was going to be a shootout. So, normally when I play heavy on certain games or have a lineup in DraftKings, I make sure they're on one of my TVs. And that Cleveland offense is so horrible because of Deshaun Watson. If you own Deshaun Watson in any way, shape, or form, get out now. If for some reason their head coach has conviction and keeps Deshaun in for one more week, like let that be your Jameson Winston bye week there. Like I think Winston's just a matter of time, if not this week, that he's going to be the starter. I don't know how that will go, that experiment, but Watson's really bad, guys. Like he is like his attitude, his body language, his interview after the conference, his decision making. There's nothing good about Deshaun Watson. I'm not trying to bash on a guy. I'm not trying to, have any recency bias. I've really been patient, but it's just bad quarterback play. So my final thought is sell any way you can, get out of a Watson situation, get Winston if you could get him on the cheap, especially if you have Watson and you can't move him because he may be hard to move right now. At least protect your quarterback situation on your roster if you're stuck with that Cleveland quarterback.
Yeah, it's been brutal. It has been absolutely brutal. I moved a share in a 12-team super flex a couple weeks ago for a 26-second. And when I made the move, I was like, I don't feel great about it. And it's been okay. All right. Well, hopefully everybody enjoyed this week's episode of Dynasty Theory. Mitch and I, yes, both of us will be back on Sunday live at 11 a.m. Eastern time for next week's episode of Winning the Week. And then hitting your feeds next Tuesday will be another weekly episode of Dynasty Theory. For Mitch Sorensen, Dan Lamagna, I'm John Bauer. Have a great week. Thanks, everybody. Peace.